Our next keynote speaker, Moises Naim, who will share insights on the future of globalism and globalization in a changing world. Moises is a distinguished fellow for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, an internationally syndicated columnist, and a best-selling and award-winning author of several influential books, including Illicit, The End of Power, and The Revenge of Power, as well as his innovative weekly television program on global affairs, Efecto Naim. Moises gained international recognition as the editor of the Foreign Policy magazine for 14 years, turning it into an award-winning publication on global politics and economics. He also served as Venezuela's Minister of Trade and Industry, Director of the country's central bank, and the Executive Director of the World Bank. He was previously a Professor of Business and Economics and Dean of IESA in Venezuela, and holds a master's degree and a PhD from MIT. He makes me feel quite unaccomplished, by the way. Moises' commentary on the world of international politics, economics, and business is influential and far-reaching. He is the chief international columnist for two of the largest daily newspapers in Spain and Italy, and he has been published in numerous publications across the globe, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Bloomberg Business Week. He has received the Ortega y Gasset Prize, the most prestigious award for journalism in the Spanish language, as well as a recognition as one of the world's leading thinkers by Prospect, and as one of the top 100 most influential global thought leaders by the GDI Gottlieb Duttweiler Institute. The conversation this evening will be moderated by Nuno Limao, the Wallenberg Chair Professor at Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service. Moises and Nuno, thank you for sharing your insights with us today and joining us for what I'm sure will be an inspiring conversation about how we can become agents of change in an increasingly complex world. Welcome.
Moses, so we were complaining about the fact that we don't have a fireplace to do our fireside chat, but we'll do our best.
You can burn something here.
I'm supposed to be moderating, but I don't know who I'm moderating against. It's going to be. So why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about what you think some of the key issues that are facing us in terms of globalization?
Sticker shock is one. Alliances are the other. And let me explain. Sticker shock is that we are, as humans, are not ready to deal with all of the emergencies that are coming our way. We are going to have all kinds of challenges, trying to use everything that has to do with decarbonization. Everybody likes it. There are some progresses. But I don't think the final total bill has come. And when we know what that bill is going to be, the reaction is going to be fierce. People that now cheer decarbonization, and I am one, will be surprised by the real costs of decarbonizing economies. Also, the real costs of disentangling China and the United States, or China and the rest of the world. That is going to be an expensive proposition, and everything that has to do with supplies and the provision, all the chains that in theory now the mantra is move to not just in time, but just a friendly way of organizing the supply chains. Well, getting the supply chains in ways that are different than they were is going to be also very expensive. So there is a list that you can imagine of emergencies that are coming our way. Artificial intelligence is a paramount example that brings a lot of good. And the artificial intelligence is going to change for the better a lot of things, from education to health to business to politics and so on. But as all technologies, it has is a double sword kind of thing, in which you also have downsides, negative consequences and so on. And those are going to hurt, and those are also going to be a sticker shock. So we have a long list of challenges that are going to be more costly to deal with than what the world is expecting. You know, apathy, indifference, the lack of sense of urgency are part of this story.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Let me mention a couple of things which I thought were very interesting, and also in the earlier sessions, which were, I share some of your sense of sort of, we don't understand the cost in some cases, or more broadly, but certainly in the business world, you know, in investing and people who are setting up their global value chains seem to now sort of internalize a number of these issues and are kind of reacting to them in a way which, in my opinion anyway, it would have been hard to imagine maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So do you think that maybe we can adapt a bit faster than we might have, say, in 2018 or 2017?
Yeah, I think so. It depends on the sectors. There are sectors in which things are moving quite fast. As you know, renewables, especially in Europe, you know, have moved quite in surprising ways. And there are other that are not that quick. You know, governments, and this is a broad observation, but governments are not equipped to deal with the emergencies that we will be facing at the speed and with the quality of response that is needed. Government performance everywhere is under what it needs to be. There are very few governments in the world today that deserve an applause. And that is because it's very hard. Governing these days is very hard. You typically operate in what is called vetocracies. It's a term coined by Frank Fukuyama. Vetocracies are these systems in which there is a bunch of actors that have veto power and are able to block initiatives, but no one has enough power to put through a strategy or initiative. So you end up with a blocked system, and we have seen it recently in the United States with the government, almost government shutdown. We see it with what was going on in Israel with the Supreme Court and Bibi Netanyahu. We are seeing it in Spain, in which, you know, these are all examples of situations in which a few radicals managed to hijack the government and put it to work for their own narrow interest and in effect, block the operation of governments. And therefore, the functioning of society is being shaped by this blockage in governmental affairs.
So let me follow up this very interesting point with another question. So we've heard a lot today about disruption from AI, from COVID, from you know, climate change, and how we'll deal with it. In a world where you have all of this disruption, you know, taking AI, for example, where, you know, it's predicted that over the next few years, maybe up to 300 million workers might be displaced, and we don't really have a good system in place to deal with those types of shocks. Do you think that having veto players, which basically, I guess, require that policy changes have a more widespread benefit, that there could be certain benefits to having those in terms of sort of maybe slowing down and allowing us to adapt to some of these changes?
Yeah, you inadvertently took me to the place where I wanted to be, which was the second point I made. The first was sticker shocks, and the second is alliances. You can get that, what you described, you know, government officials with politicians, with people in business, with people in all kinds of walks of life, getting together in a great national alliance to move forward the country, the nation, in a way that is constructive. That is indispensable. Look around the world and you will see, again, emergencies that are not being taken care of because they are blocked. And so the only way to unblock it is to have alliances. And everybody's happy when talking about that until you tell them who do you have to be allied to, in which they run for the hills. The alliances that are needed are between groups and entities and individuals that hate each other, and that would be willing to work with people that they disdain, that they don't like, that they feel offended even by the possibility of working together. And so, but my prediction, for whatever it's worth, is that in the next 10 years or more, countries that manage to find a way of making these unnatural alliances among people and institutions that are rivals and are even enemies, if you put them together and they work, these countries are going to have progress. The others, the ones that are just going like the United States, for example, in which has been blocked for many years, is going to stagnate and decline. So alliances, pacts, agreements, and it don't have to be about everything in the world and the totality of the human experience of government or politics, but just pick a few critical areas and find an alliance that is sustainable, that is not just opportunistic and transitory, but stays, and you can have a time horizon of a decade in which you can work together to do things. Those countries that manage to get that are going to progress. The others are going to be stagnant or declining.
So that reminds me of a point in an earlier session. I believe it was Joe Baratta who was talking about sort of the need for, at least in the US, business and government to work more cooperatively and in a way that's less adversarial, with a few examples there. I wonder if, this is the time when we were saying, well, maybe some of the European model where there is a bit more of cooperation between governments and business is one, or whether you're just thinking about it in the context of politics, where, obviously you have these extremist views, which are a lot harder to accommodate.
Yeah, except that what you just described is not Europe. Europe has, the fragmentation and the conflict even within business and government in other countries. What you describe is, more likely, it's more like what's happening in Sweden in the north of Europe than in Europe. And the other thing is that we are witnessing what's going on in Europe is also a blockage and vetoes and blocking. And this is universal. If you think about Malaysia, you think about Thailand, all of Central America is paralyzed by, again, what I just said, a few individuals that are in Congress or in the judiciary that manage to hijack the government and put it at the service of their narrow interests.
So let me just ask one final question in that regard. So in earlier sessions, we were also talking about uncertainty and risk, and I believe one of them, the US government was pointed as the biggest source of uncertainty and risk these days for various reasons, including the possibility that regulations and subsidies like the IRA may very well be reversed. And this idea that across the world, regulations that tended to be fairly stable for business are now basically fairly unstable, and they can shift with governments. So I'm trying to line that up with sort of the stagnant kind of description that you're giving us, right? Where you'd expect sort of the status quo to remain, as opposed to having these changes in policies that were kind of being alluded to earlier on.
That's a challenge that has been with us for a long time, which is what is the appropriate dimension and quality and scope of regulations. And the accusations that the regulations always come at great costs, both direct and indirect. You know, we know quite a bit about market failure. And typically a lot of these controls and a lot of these subsidies, as that you mentioned, have to do with that. Again, they always late to the game. A lot of the regulations that are put in place arrive and are put in place 10 years after they had been originally proposed. So the problem with regulation is that it's always late to the game.
So let me move from this issue that you've laid out within countries and kind of think about it across countries. So, you know, obviously a lot of the issues we've talked about, climate change, the costs and benefits of AI, these are global issues, right? And a lot of the challenges that we face are about creating standards, creating rules, and ways to cooperate on these issues. How should we think about, should we be investing in rebuilding institutions like the WTO, which clearly are failing now? Or should we be moving away from these consensus-based institutions and maybe focusing on a different structure?
Absolutely. And the different structure, I wrote a paper, an article a while ago about minilateralism. You know, if you take the 10 most important threats the world is facing, and you know, from climate change to artificial intelligence, or the negative threats of that, to migration, to do the list, and ask yourself, how many countries, what are the countries that define that as a problem, and that ought to be at the table to negotiate and find a way, and to do something better than what we have for that, is never more than 15. Any big problem that it needs to be addressed, you know, from a global perspective, it's about 15 countries. You get 15 countries in the room, and you force them to try to find an agreement, and you are going to have dealt with a big chunk of the problem at hand. And I call that minilateralism. I don't want multilateralism in which, you know, 190 countries have to decide and have to agree. No, let's find the ones that are really matter and see how we can make that work in a more, you know, less numerous participants. And so the WTO is a special circumstances, is going through a very difficult time. I think you're an expert on that, and I think you would agree that is at its worst moments. You know, the WTO, which is indispensable for a lot of things, is no longer a resource that people think of, and that's bad. I think it's very important to restore the capacity of the WTO to do the job, and but it's the governments that control it that are a problem there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what I've done, the work that I've done, I agree in the context of the WTO, it's been sort of this proliferation of the number of countries, and also the fact that power across countries has changed considerably, but the structure has remained kind of the post-World War II structure of sort of consensus, which was what kind of the minilaterals within the WTO at that point, kind of how they addressed the issues. So how do you view things like preferential agreements, where countries are in effect these days? If you read those agreements, they have chapters on everything related, ranges from data to...
Yeah, that's right. And that was one of the reasons why the WTO lost effectiveness, is that it was used for a lot of things and for everything. You know, everybody that was working, every NGO, every government, every lobbyist that was working on something just took it to the WTO, and they congested the organization. They created havoc in the arrangements and the modalities of working. And so it needs a cleanup and again, relaunching. I think this will not be solved. The WTO and will not become more effective just by, you know, minor adjustments. It will require a major reform.
So earlier on, Ricardo was trying to get the speakers to be a bit more positive in terms of their message and outlook. I don't know that we've had a very positive message so
Well,
far.
we're very-
But let me ask you, if you had to, what are some of the bright spots that you see in terms of our ability to, and you suggested mini-laterals, but are there some concrete steps or things that you see might be changing that might facilitate
But
that?
I'm glad that Professor Ricardo is here and he's going to give us the optimism. No, seriously, I do think there are good news in a variety of ways. One of the good news is, if I would have told you, if you invited me 5 years ago at these things, and I would have told you that Europe was going to get together and work in an organized agreement, an alliance, and it was going to take on Russia, you would have thrown me out of the room, because Europe was fragmented, Europe was paralyzed, Europe was a bunch of people giving speeches, bureaucrats, a massive program of bureaucrats. And then what happened? Well, Putin decided to invade Ukraine. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Europeans showed up. And showed up in a way that was effective, it was quick, it was real, and it was sustainable. So all of a sudden, Europe discovers that it's a superpower, but they didn't know. Putin helped them understand the role that they could play in the world. And they are using it. And so they're using their superpowers, which is essentially the capacity to act together and make tough, difficult decisions in a way that matters. That's good news. That shows not only that Europe is a player, and I welcome Europe as a player. I want the values that Europe represents. I want those values at the tables where these decisions are made. I don't want the values that Xi Jinping represents or Vladimir Putin represents. I'm happy with European values, which are easy to disdain and make fun of. But it's good to have a whole continent with the capabilities and possibilities that that Europe has. So that's good news, and it shows that if it happened there, it can happen elsewhere. Things are going to happen in the Indo-Chinese world. So I am optimistic that within that context, the context is not good, right? I have been talking about the list of threats that are with us, but it shows that when they flare up, all of a sudden we have surprises and things are just straightened.
Very good. So Europe as a template for some of these minilateral that you were suggesting.
Well, Europe is 27. The magic number in Europe is 27, so that's fine. And as we speak, there is a meeting of the ministers of foreign affairs of Europe getting together to talk about Ukraine. These people never met before. The 27 of them just for that kind of things. They have all kinds of meetings, but this is rare, especially in the way it is structured, the way it's different. And it shows you that there is some learning in Europe also of how to conduct diplomacy.
Excellent. So on that positive note, let me open the floor up for questions.
There are no questions, we can go drink already. So
Yeah, good with that. Seems you were very persuasive in your argument.
Just to keep it interesting, I'll ask a question. Rahul Gupta with Accenture. Very curious on your views as to how the current vote that took the aid out of for Ukraine is going to play with the Europeans. You just made a statement that the Europeans learned to work together, but as we heard earlier, there isn't money flowing there, just weapon systems. So I'm curious to see, with the recent election in Slovakia and some of your comments, how this alliance is going to play out when the US may not be able to send money. Does this multilateralism or minilateralism really work? Thanks.
Yes. No, you're right. And there is no denying that there is fatigue. There is Ukraine fatigue. People are both asking, until when are we going to be, spending billions of dollars, and how does this end? That's a question. But at the same time, and alongside that, also you have realities in the ground. And that is that in Europe, these governments are doing something very tough and are sustaining it. Who would have said that, more than a year after the invasion, they're still at it? And so there is a list of reasons why Europe can be a model for others. And remember, in a lot of this fatigue, you can count for sure that there is Russia's capacity to influence social media and others. And so, there's a lot of bots about not helping or, making fun of those who support helping Ukraine. And you can imagine that there is a whole apparatus in Russia and elsewhere, but sponsored by by the Kremlin, that is sowing doubts and malaise and antipathy to what is happening. In one of the sessions, it was mentioned that the U.S. is in many ways living a vacuum in leadership. So what is your take if, rather than the G20, it happened, India was making a prominent role, China wasn't there, Russia wasn't there. So what if it happened with the G20? That's something that you see optimism there, or you see like coming? Yeah. It's very difficult. This belongs to the school of thought that that you need to change the Security Council, that the UN will be paralyzed until Russia is sitting in the Security Council of the UN. And that applies to other multilateral organizations, as you know. And the issue of leadership is there, because we talk about these institutions, the G20 or the multilaterals and so on, and we talk about them, but we forget that they do what their governments tell them to do. The capitals of the main countries define a lot of what these organizations can do. And there is a problem of leadership. I think there is wide agreement that the world's leaders, with few exceptions, are not standing up to and not developing what is needed. So the world has a problem of, big problems, small leaders. And the leaders that are available are not showing great dexterity in managing, other than they're staying in power. But even more worrisome and worse than the problems with leadership, we have problems of followership. The followers of these leaders are also, epitomized by the British, the Brexit, right? The day after Brexit was approved, everybody in England, or everybody, a lot of people in England went to find out what was Brexit. What did they vote for? All the Google measures show nobody cared, and all of a sudden there's elections, Brexit happens, and then people go find out. That epitomizes the kind of followership that needs to be addressed, because it's global.
So let me actually, we have another question. While we wait for that question, let me pick up on one thing here. So you talked about the weakness of leaders, but you've also talked about sort of authoritarian leaders and sort of the weak leaders not being able to maybe implement some of these reforms. Can we think about the opposite happening in some of these authoritarian regimes, and actually they being able to kind of implement some of these?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Governments are having a hard time governing. And that is true for democracies and autocracies. Putin, before the invasion, was not doing that well. Look at what's happening in India. We were told that India was going to be an economic superpower, that it was going to surpass the United States, and that that China was it. Well, China is entangled now in a series of problems that go from a real estate crisis to demography to an economy that is not delivering what was promised. And so there is a myth that autocrats, Mussolini, for example, know how to, strong hand, they go and do things. Xi Jinping, when they were the Olympics, and the Olympics in China, in Beijing, and they had, probably you remember, a spectacular way in which the opening and the closing of so everybody said, well, wow, this Chinese know how to do things. And they can do it because they are autocrat. They don't have to go through democratic processes. Well, it turns out that no, bad governing and difficult delivery by governments is universal, and it happens in democracy and in autocracies.
Yes, I have a question for Moises. With your expertise and your historical knowledge, how do you see this war ending? Because everybody talks about the war, but I don't see. So if you had to give advice to the world leaders, what advice would you give to try to see if we can end the war?
I don't know. The question is in everybody's minds, and you are right to bring it up. We have in the world, other moments in which we have situations like this, in which you end up with a frozen conflict, in which, think about North and South Korea, essentially is frozen, right? And there are many. There is a list of countries and regions where there is, frozen. That's a possibility. The other possibility is that it depends a lot about who is the next president of the United States. Donald Trump has already told us that he would solve the problem within 24 hours. And we know, he didn't say how, but we know how. He's just going to the Kremlin and saying, I'm all yours, what do I need to do? But the other thing is that both sides need to show a victory. Both the Kremlin needs to show that what all of this calamity, this tragedy was not for nothing. So they need to show some winning, something. And Zelensky and the Ukrainians also need that. If there are elections now in Ukraine, and the candidates that say, let's negotiate and yes, agree to give up parts of our territory, they will be out of office in 30 seconds. Because what people and the Ukrainians are asking is, all this effort, all this suffering, all this tragedy for what? And so those are the kind of conversations. But mostly what's happening, what will be happening in the United States, if the United States is governed by Donald Trump, is you have a complete different scenario that if you continue the route that is now on.
Hello, my name's Philip Gunn. I'm a student here at Georgetown. Thank you for being here today. My question is about the World Bank, since you were ED there. What do you think about the direction that they've taken since you were there? And do you have any opinion on the current CEO?
I like him a lot. I think it's a very good choice. The bank has gone through difficult moments with problems with leadership and governance. And I think there is a will now to try to do something different and make it work better. I think the current CEO is an inspired choice that was surprising, but it's there. And I look forward to see what he does that is different.
Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. My name is Victor Shilagowski. I'm a classmate of Philip's in the International Business and Policy program. Tying your comments on leadership back to values, European values or Western values, what is one way in which you would counsel leaders to understand or prioritize their culture's values against the opportunities for these mini-laterals on potentially a point or specific issue that may require alignment to another country or culture where those values potentially don't align?
Right. There are non-negotiable values, and you know that. And there are a few things that cannot be negotiated and not touched, and others that are maybe more fluid, in which you can find some sort of agreements without breaking your commitment to this fundamental existential kind of values. So that to be clear of what is very important before to analyze what can happen and everything else, and understanding what are the non-negotiable things. But that will change too. We will see, as a result of climate change and artificial intelligence, we will see conditions that will require for us to adopt different kinds of values.
Thank you very much, Max Blandon. I'm a member of the board of the Baratta Center for Global Business and one of its founding members. So thank you for being here. I have two general questions. The first one is it time for the world, or as you say, the mini-lateralist, to rethink the post-war multilateral system? In other words, the UN, the World Bank, all of these other organizations that were designed and built right after World War II, is it time to rethink that whole concept? And then the second question is really more about immigration. So for the past several years, we've had the highest movement of people in the history of the world, from Africa, from the Middle East, from South America, et cetera. And everybody's complaining about it, obviously for obvious reasons in some cases. But the reality is that the developed nations are not producing enough people to basically continue the growth in population. So how do you deal with that dichotomy? You have people that want to go to a better place where there's going to be a need for people, but people are being rejected. And so those are the two questions.
And those are two great questions for which there are no easy answer. The first one is to rethink and relaunch multilateral organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, the United Nations, and the Security Council. All of that needs repair or fundamental redesign and relaunch. And again, one should not look at the institutions, one should look at the owners and the controllers of the institutions. And these are the leaders that in their own country, they are struggling. And so sometimes it's impossible to ask them to do anything because they're just doing their best they can not to lose power and not to get out of office. But there is no doubt that if I am a big believer of those institutions, even though I am well aware of the defects, and they can be reformed, but not profoundly because of the political constraints and the fact that the governments that control it. And now with the split in the world, how do you go to the IMF and say, we have a new way of thinking and we need to have China, India, and Russia in one side and the Western, Europe and the United States and Japan in the other side? How do you cook that very difficult situation? You can't. And so that's that. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer. I will welcome. I am one of those people who thinks that if these multilateral institutions did not exist, they would have to be created, perhaps using some knowledge accumulated from the mistakes that have been taking place. But we need those institutions and we need them to function. And again, that depends on the nature of the leadership and governance that they have. On migration, there is such a thing. We have there's peaceful coexistence with the idea that all problems have solutions. But it turns out that there are some wicked problems that simply don't have solutions. There is not such a thing as a solution to the migrant crisis. You can do a lot better. You can design institutions. You can put together resources, people, institutions, and so on. But that's a subject I have been tracking, and I have concluded that there is a lot that can be done. But don't go there to the conversation, believing that you're going to solve the problem. From where I sit, the problem has no solution. And I can say that because I'm not a politician. I'm not looking for the sympathy of people, voters, but it's a wicked problem. That's the optimistic note in which I want to.
I could have a follow-up on that, on the demographics. So this was a key factor that you pointed out in your book about how power was dispersing. You know, the fact that we have so many more people, the fact that we have so many more countries, and so on. So, you know, the population growth is projected to start declining. So, you know, sometime in this century, do you see that as becoming an important factor in addressing some of these issues?
You mean concretely getting?
In terms of, for example, you know, the opposition that certain governments face, or one of the examples in your book was related to conflict and the share of population, you know, below 25, and how those two things were fairly highly correlated. So, you know, we're going to go through a large shift in demographics that's going to affect, you know, lots of things, but how does it fit in with your view in terms of sort of power and how power is sort of dispersed? Is that a force for concentration?
Yes, there is both. In my first book, The End of Power, it was a study of the forces that were diluting power and changing it. And in the next one is, and the first one, The End of Power, was about the centrifugal forces that spread power. The second book was of the centripetal forces that concentrate power. And they're both simultaneously operating. It's not that you have a dispersion of power and concentration of power. It's that you have both things happening daily in front of you that create that. Just look at what's happening to power in the United States and what we were talking about. A few people, just Congress people that are able to hijack the decision-making in Congress and the United States, and that with huge effects around the world. And at the same time, you can see new dynamics in the world, right? You have China, Taiwan, North Korea. There are all kinds of new things or old things that appear in a new guise. So there is both. The central message is that power is being diluted, but at the same time, power is being concentrated. And both things happen at the same time.
Good. One final question.
Thank you for your Fireside. It's for coming to Georgetown. In the spirit of being hosted at the business school, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what vision you think, descriptively, what will the international liberal order look like in 20 years? And if so, if it does exist, what role will business have in maintaining that system?
Can you give me a discount and do it for 10 years? If I knew the answer to that, I'll be a professor at Georgetown. No, that's a very valid question, in fact. It's a very valid question, especially people, professionals in your position, you have to be asking, and it's very hard. All I can say is that if I were where you are, the main skill, or the main aspect of my performance will be centered on being very, very flexible, very able to react and live in different circumstances, and being versatile. I will give courses on versatility. Be versatile, be able to do different things at different moments in different organizations. I will bet that most of you that will be graduating soon will work in more than one company, will work in more than one country also, and will work in more than one specialty. I think most of you will have these multiple experiences, and therefore get ready for that, study for that, be curious about that, how to be effectively in adapting to rapidly changing circumstances.
Thank you.
Right, that's a great point for us to finish. Versatility and adaptability, which has also been a theme throughout, for sure is something that we all need to get used to. Moises, thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.